My husband got a promotion. His friend got a place to stay. And I got a silence so heavy it still hasn't left the bed. My name is Lena. I'm 41. I make lists even when I don't need to. Groceries, cleaning, what to say at dinners. I match socks with strange satisfaction. I wipe crumbs off the counter twice. Once when no one's looking, and once again after. Just in case. I've been married for almost 20 years. To Mark. He's good. Reliable. Predictable in a way that used to calm me, and now just fills the air. He leaves his shoes by the door. Always in the same spot. Drinks his coffee without sugar. Always 2 pieces of toast. Never 3. He loves crime podcasts. Hates cilantro. Thinks silence is comfort. He thinks I do too. And maybe I did. Once. The week he got the promotion, everything felt too loud. We celebrated, of course. A bottle of wine, the kind with a real cork, not a twist-off. A fancy dinner from a place downtown I used to love when we were younger, when linen napkins meant something. He smiled more that night. A different smile, not his usual polite one. Something a little too sharp. Proud, but not soft. Like he was being watched and wanted to get it right. He toasted to what comes next. I smiled. Clinked my glass. Took a sip I didn't want. Then refilled his before he had to ask. That's what you do, right? You support. You stay steady. You know the pattern. Caleb flew in that weekend. Mark's oldest friend. They met in college, roommates, or something close enough to be remembered that way. He's stayed with us before. A few times, spaced out by years. Always briefly. Always on his way somewhere else. He lives on the coast now. Works in finance. Or consulting. Or something that sounds busy over the phone. I never ask for details. And he never offers them. He arrived Friday evening. Same duffel bag. Same clean-shaven face. Same scent. Something cedar and worn leather. Not a cologne. More like a memory. He hugged Mark first. Laughed loud. The kind of laugh that bounces off walls like it belongs to the house. When he turned to me, he said my name. Just once. Just Lena. No hug. Just a look. Familiar. Too familiar. But not impolite. His eyes lingered half a second too long. Not long enough to call out. Just long enough to be remembered. Dinner was simple. Steak. Potatoes. Roasted vegetables. A bottle of red Mark had been saving. They talked for hours. I cleaned the plates as they went. Kept the dishwasher humming so I didn't have to be in the room too much. Mark drank more than usual. 2 glasses. Then 3. His voice got louder. His arms more animated. Caleb stayed quiet. Listening more than he spoke. Watching. Not just Mark. Me too. Not always directly. Just often enough for me to notice. The second time I caught him looking, he didn't glance away. He just held the gaze for a moment. Then blinked. Slowly. Like he'd just filed something away. By 10, Mark had started to fade. That soft unraveling of speech. The comfortable slouch of someone full and a little proud of it. He stretched out on the couch, one arm behind his head, the other still holding his wine. I brought him a blanket. He didn't ask. He smiled, murmured something. I nodded. Caleb stood to the side, leaning against the doorway between the kitchen and the living room. He didn't say much. Just watched as Mark drifted into that half-sleep men slip into when they believe they've earned it. Then he looked at me. And that time, I looked back. For too long. I'll clean up, I said, more to the room than anyone in it. Caleb nodded. Not as thanks. More like acknowledgement. Like he knew I would. He disappeared upstairs. Quietly. Mark was already snoring. I rinsed the last of the glasses. Wiped the counter. Rechecked the locks. folded the dish towel in thirds, then changed my mind and made it halves. I checked on Mark before going up. Still on the couch, one foot on the floor, blanket half off. I could have woken him, told him to come to bed, but he looked content, and something in me didn't want to break the stillness. So I turned off the lamp and went upstairs alone. As I passed the guest room, I slowed. The door wasn't closed, just slightly ajar, enough to catch the light from the hallway. I didn't mean to stop. Not really, but I did. I stood there for a breath, maybe two, and then his voice came quiet from the dark. "You're still up." I didn't answer right away. Then, "Just finish the dishes." A pause. Then he said, "You do that every time." "Do what?" "Clean. Like it's a performance." I frowned. "It's not." He didn't respond. I should have walked away, said goodnight, closed my door. But instead I shifted my weight, stepped closer. "Can't sleep?" I asked, keeping my voice low. He looked up from the bed. His face was in shadow, but his eyes caught the light. He didn't smile, didn't nod, just looked. And then he lifted one hand and tapped the edge of the blanket beside him. Not an invitation. Not quite. Just a space. Unspoken. Undisturbed. I stood in the doorway, caught between logic and something quieter. And then I stepped inside. Just for a moment. Just to talk. That's what I told myself. I stepped into the guest room and closed the door behind me. Not all the way. Just enough to soften the sound. There was a lamp on. Dim. The kind of light that makes things feel farther apart than they are. A soft hum came from somewhere. Maybe the vent. Maybe the walls, but it was the kind of sound you don't notice until you need something to drown out your thoughts. He sat against the headboard. Legs stretched under the covers. T-shirt, soft and plain. The blanket folded at his waist like it hadn't moved all night. He hadn't made a mess of the bed. Just settled into it, like he'd done this before. He didn't say anything when I sat down. Not beside him. Just near the edge. My hands rested in my lap, fingers still damp from the dishes. The air in the room was warm. Not heavy, but dense. "I didn't think you were still awake," I said quietly. He tilted his head. "I was." "How long?" "A while." I nodded like that answered something, but it didn't. There's a type of silence that feels safe. The kind you grow into over years. The kind that sits between two people like a shared coat. This wasn't that kind. This silence was something else. It didn't rest. It pressed. I looked around the room not because I needed to, but because I couldn't look at him again just yet. The books on the nightstand were untouched. His phone face down. A bottle of water unopened. I reached for the edge of the blanket and adjusted it over my knees. The gesture was small, but it felt too loud. He watched. Not in a way that demanded anything. Just noticed. "Mark's out," I said, unsure why I was naming it. "I know," he replied. Another pause. "I think he was asleep before I came up." "I know." His voice didn't change, didn't push, but something inside me twisted anyway. I should have left then. I knew that. But I stayed, not because I wanted something, not because I expected something, but because I needed something, something I couldn't name, something that lived in the spaces between questions. He shifted, slightly, just his arm, resting over his chest now. I caught the movement in my peripheral vision. Not a threat, not even a suggestion, but it made me acutely aware of how close we were. Not touching, not even brushing, but closer than I'd ever been to a man who wasn't my husband, in a bed that wasn't mine, while my own husband slept one floor below. I said softly, "You look different this time." He turned to me. Not quickly. "How?" I shrugged. "I don't know." calmer. He nodded. I am. Why? He didn't answer. And I didn't ask again. Somewhere downstairs, a floorboard settled. The kind of sound you wouldn't notice unless you were already listening too hard. I folded my hands in my lap. My wrist brushed my thigh. He watched the motion. His eyes didn't linger, but they didn't flinch either. Lena, he said. Just my name. And I didn't breathe for a second. It wasn't the first time he'd said it, but it was the first time it felt like something was being handed to me. A weight. A decision. I know, I whispered, though I didn't know what I was responding to. I just felt the need to fill the space. Then came the worst part. The longest silence. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't intense. It was felt. Every second stretched thin. Long enough for me to become aware of my own pulse. The way my breath shortened. The way I could feel the fabric of my shirt touching my back. He shifted again. Sat up straighter. Do you want to leave? He asked. Not teasing. Not mocking. Genuine. And suddenly I didn't know what I wanted. I looked at the door. Then at him. And I said, I don't know. His jaw tensed. A muscle there I hadn't noticed before flickered beneath the skin. He looked at my wrist. Just briefly. I lowered it. It's just a conversation, I said. As if saying that made it true. He nodded. But neither of us spoke again. The silence grew. It wasn't absence. It was pressure. And something shifted in my body. Something I couldn't pull back from. Not desire. Not guilt. Just displacement. As if my life had taken one step sideways and left me watching from just outside the edge of it. I leaned back slightly, just enough that my shoulder touched the headboard. My breath slowed. His hand was still resting on the blanket, palm up. Not near me. Not close enough to reach. But my eyes went to it, and stayed there. For a second too long. We didn't touch. Not really. But something passed between us. Like a current. Like something unsaid that had grown too large to stay invisible. My whole body was listening. But he didn't move. And neither did I. I stood. Quietly. Slowly. The room felt smaller than it had when I entered. I should go, I said. I know, he said. At the door, I paused. I didn't look back. Not because I didn't want to, but because I already knew what I'd find. I went back to my bedroom. Mark was still asleep. One arm over his chest, his face turned toward the wall. The blanket rising and falling like a metronome. I crawled into bed carefully. My heart still didn't slow. And the silence was louder here. Because now, it wasn't shared. It was mine. Reached the stairs. Didn't exhale until I could no longer feel the warmth of the guest room behind me. Every step felt slow. Measured. Like I had to learn how to move again. I touched the railing with the tips of my fingers, not for balance, but as if I needed something real to prove the night had boundaries. That I hadn't slipped out of time completely. Our bedroom door creaked slightly as I pushed it open. The room was dark, heavy with Mark's sleep. He lay on his side, facing away. One arm bent under the pillow, one foot uncovered, the way he always slept when the wine was just enough to make him forget the neatness of things. I stood in the doorway for a long time, watching him breathe. Nothing about him looked different. Which, in a way, was worse. Because everything in me had shifted, and he hadn't moved at all. I slid under the covers carefully, slowly, trying not to disturb the shape he'd made in the mattress. But the bed felt foreign now. Too wide. Too clean. Too untouched. The place beside him still smelled like cologne. A faint trace of it clung to the pillowcase. I turned toward the wall. Closed my eyes. My wrist brushed the sheet. And I remembered everything I hadn't done. Everything I hadn't said. And still, everything that had happened. Sleep didn't come. What came was stillness. The kind that presses, that leans into the hollow spaces behind your ribs and weights, that holds your throat with invisible fingers and dares you to make a sound. In the morning, the light arrived before I was ready. It crept under the curtain, across the carpet, over the bed, slow and indifferent. Mark stirred beside me. I closed my eyes quickly, faked the breath of someone just waking. He rolled onto his back, yawned, and said something about the headache he could already feel coming. I nodded. He didn't look at me, just stretched, then climbed out of bed, his steps quick, habitual. The bathroom door clicked shut. Water ran. Toothpaste cap off. Tap running too long. Cabinet closing twice. He always forgets something. I lay there, eyes open now. The ceiling held nothing, and my body felt like something I'd borrowed. Downstairs, he made coffee. I followed 10 minutes later. Pulled on a robe, pressed my fingers to my cheeks for color, tried to become her again, the Lena he knew. When I walked in, Caleb was already in the kitchen. Dressed. Packed. Leaning against the counter with a glass of water in hand, like he hadn't shared a silence with me in the dark a few hours earlier. He smiled. Soft. Casual. Not performative, just light enough to disappear if I didn't catch it. I said, "Morning." He nodded. "Sleep okay?" My breath caught, just slightly. "Fine." Mark handed me a mug, kissed the side of my head absently. "Caleb's heading out early," he said. "Early flight," Caleb added. "Too early for a Sunday," Mark said with a mock groan. They both laughed. I smiled. Not too wide. We sat together for 20 minutes. Small talk. Sips of coffee. News headlines. Mark complained about work already piling up even though his promotion had barely processed. Something about emails. Something about people above him who now had to look below. Caleb listened. Nodded in the right places. Offered a few dry observations, just enough to sound amused but not cynical. He didn't look at me. Not once. Which only made me more aware of the outline of his presence. The curve of his shoulder. The way his fingers tapped lightly on the mug. The wrist. The silence between every sentence he didn't say. After he left, Mark walked around the house, straightening things that didn't need straightening. "Glad he came," he said. I nodded. "Always good to catch up." I nodded again. "He said we're lucky. Said we seem solid." My throat tightened. "Did he?" "Yeah." Said the guest room was better than most hotels. I looked up at that. And he laughed. "He's right. I should sleep in there more often." He meant it as a joke. I smiled. But my stomach turned. I did laundry that afternoon. Sheets. Towels. The guest room pillowcases. I stripped the bed slowly. Not because I was tired, but because I needed to move with my hands, not with my head. I found one of his hairs on the pillow. Dark. Curled slightly. I held it between 2 fingers longer than I should have. Then dropped it into the trash. That night, I crawled into bed after Mark. He was already reading. Glasses on. Pages rustling. He looked up, smiled. "Tired?" "Yeah. You were quiet today." I paused. Just thinking. About what? I opened my mouth, then closed it. "Nothing important." He nodded, already halfway back into the paragraph. He turned the light off at 10:47. Rolled onto his side. Said goodnight in the same voice he always used. I stared at the ceiling again. My wrist rested on my stomach. It felt like it didn't belong to the rest of me. There was no bruise. No mark. Nothing I could point to and say, "This is where it happened." But my body remembered. The weight of the moment. The breath that never landed. The space beside me that I never meant to step into and did anyway. The next morning, I stood in front of the mirror. Lifted my sleeve. Ran my finger over the skin that still hummed. It was smooth. Pale. Harmless. And it felt like a lie. Caleb sent a message 2 days later. "Thanks again." You two are golden. That room's too comfortable. Be careful, I might come back. No emojis. No hint. Just clean. Mark showed me the text. Laughed. He's such a bum. I nodded. Should I tell him you'll start charging rent? He asked. I smiled. Tell him next time we'll make him cook. He texted back. I deleted the message from my mind. Or tried. But it stayed. The words. The silence between them. The absence of what we didn't say. Some things don't stay in the body. They stay in the air. In the hallway light. In the bedsheets and wrist bones, and the corners of your throat where honesty never quite rises. Caleb slept in our guest room. I didn't. And that truth, that quiet, unshakable truth, has made the silence louder every night since. Mark got his promotion. The raise came a month later. There was a bonus. A new watch. A better chair in the home office. He started saying things like leverage and visibility in casual conversations. He bought new shirts. Crisp. Blue. The kind that look expensive but never wrinkle. I learned how to iron them just right. Folded them by color. Hung them by date of wear. It gave my hands something to do. The silence came later. Not all at once. Not a dramatic shift. Not a slammed door or a withheld kiss. Just a slow, gentle quieting. Like a radio fading out, not because it's off, but because the station drifted somewhere else. I remember the first time I realized I was flinching, not because I was afraid, not even because I felt something, but because I didn't. Mark reached for me at dinner, just a hand on mine, casual, warm, familiar. And I pulled back, just slightly, barely more than a twitch. He didn't even notice. But I did, and it stayed with me all night. I started moving through the house differently. Softer, quieter. Not because I was hiding, but because everything I touched felt borrowed. The countertop, the arm of the couch, the doorknob of the guest room I no longer opened. It all felt like it belonged to someone else's life. A woman who smiled more easily, who never hesitated in doorways, who didn't wonder if a single evening could split time in half. Sometimes I stand in that hallway, at the edge of where it happened, or didn't happen. Depending on who you are and how you measure moments. I don't open the door. I just rest my fingers on the handle and listen to my pulse. I haven't seen Caleb since. Not in person. But he texts Mark now and then. Always casual. Always brief. He never asks how I am. And I never ask why he left without looking at me again. I could have told Mark. Not everything. Just a fraction. A sliver of the night. The part where I walked in. The part where I sat down. The part where silence touched skin and time lost shape. But I didn't, because I wasn't sure what the truth was. Not really. Not in a way that could be packaged. Pointed to. Explained. I couldn't say, he kissed me, because he didn't. I couldn't say, he held me, because he didn't. I couldn't say, he hurt me, because it wasn't that kind of pain. But I was changed. And how do you confess to something that didn't happen in the way people understand? I told myself it was nothing. A moment. A breath. A pause too long. But nothing broke. Nothing burned. Nothing spilled. Still, everything shifted. And it hasn't shifted back. I think about the moment I sat down on that bed. Not with regret. Not with longing, but with a kind of fascination. Because it didn't feel like a decision. It felt like surrender. Not to him. To stillness. To being looked at. To being noticed. Not as a wife. Not as a role. But as something real. Something whole and separate. And that was the most dangerous part. Not what he did. What he saw. Mark loves me. I know he does. He brings me tea when I forget to drink water. He tells his coworkers I'm brilliant even though I haven't worked in years. He kisses my cheek in the morning. Always the cheek. Always before brushing his teeth. But when he looks at me, I don't think he sees me. Not really. Not like Caleb did. In that one moment. That one impossible, quiet, unforgettable second. Sometimes I think about messaging him. Just to ask, did you feel it too? But I don't. Because it wouldn't matter. Because even if he said yes, even if he named it, it wouldn't make it more real. Or less. So I live with it. Not as a weight, but as a shape. A shadow in the house that doesn't move when the lights change. A memory with no timestamp. A stillness that follows me from room to room. Mark and I still make love sometimes. It's gentle, predictable, kind. But afterward, I turn toward the window. And I press my fingers to my wrist. Not because it hurts. Because I want to remember what it felt like to be touched by something that never needed skin. Caleb slept in our guest room. I didn't. And I don't think I ever will again. Because something stayed in that space. Something I left behind. And now, no matter where I sleep, a part of me still lives in that pause.